Most nights in Redwood Springs came and went without much more than a bar fight or a drunk driver swerving too wide on the mountain roads. But tonight wasn't one of those nights. Tonight the storm carried more than rain. It carried judgment, whispers, and the sting of failure that clung to Sergeant Ethan Parker like a second skin. The mountain air was raw and restless. A thin drizzle slicked the highway, turning the yellow lane lines into blurred streaks under the rotating flash of red and blue. Tires hissed against wet pavement. Wipers swiped furiously, but they couldn't clear away the haze clinging to the windshield, or the pounding of Ethan's heart as he pushed the patrol cruiser harder around the bend. At 34, Ethan was tall and lean, his brown hair cropped close, his storm-gray eyes sharp yet tired. His uniform clung damp to his shoulders, sweat and rain mingling in cold lines down his back. The years had carved a hardness into his face, not just from work on the force, but from the kind of childhood that leaves its mark. Raised by a widowed mother who worked endless shifts at the diner, Ethan had learned early that life rarely handed out favors. Every inch of ground he stood on now was clawed for and fought for, and still, many of his fellow officers looked at him like he didn't belong, like ambition was wasted on someone from the wrong side of town. In the passenger seat, Rex braced himself against the floorboards. At 9 years old, the German shepherd had grown grayer around the muzzle, slower in his step, but no less fierce. His sable coat rippled with each turn, his ears twitching, his eyes alive with the focus of a soldier who'd once trained for war and never forgot it. To Ethan, Rex was more than a canine partner. He was a shield, a compass, a steady heartbeat, against a world too quick to doubt and discard. Ahead of them, a pair of taillights flickered in and out of sight, the stolen black pickup that had been tearing through county roads for nearly an hour. The thieves from Denver had left chaos in their wake, busted mailboxes, terrified drivers, and the kind of reckless speed that begged for disaster. Ethan had radioed for backup, but as usual, help crawled when it should have sprinted. "Stay with me, boy," Ethan muttered, his left shoulder screaming every time he yanked the wheel. He had clipped a guardrail earlier, and the jolt had nearly ripped his arm from its socket. Pain burned hot and deep, but adrenaline kept him pressing forward. The truck swerved suddenly, cutting hard onto a narrow service road. Gravel flew. Ethan followed, tires shrieking in protest. Rain blurred everything except the two beams of his headlights and the shadows dancing at the edges of the trees. Rex barked, a sharp warning that echoed inside the cruiser. Then it ended in chaos. The pickup fishtailed, skidded too fast, and slammed nose first into a ditch. Two silhouettes flung themselves from the cab, vanishing into the dripping black woods. Ethan slammed the brakes, lurched out of the cruiser, and chased them despite the searing fire in his shoulder. Rex bounded ahead, his muscles taut, teeth bared, his instincts as sharp as ever. But human grit only goes so far when pain drags you down. Ethan's boots slipped on a slick root, sending him sprawling onto the injured shoulder with a grunt that stole the breath from his lungs. He rolled, staggered to his feet, but by then the thieves were gone, swallowed by the forest and the storm. Rex returned to his side, panting, mud streaking his muzzle, tail lashing in frustration. A low growl rumbled in his chest, his body quivering with unfinished duty. Ethan sank to one knee, clutching his shoulder. His voice was raw, bitter. "We lost them." The rain drizzled steady, headlights cutting lonely beams across the deserted road. Ethan sat there for a moment, chest heaving, anger thick in his throat. He could already hear it, the smirks, the whispers waiting for him back at the precinct. Another chase. Another, almost. To some, almost was failure dressed in uniform. Rex pressed close, his warm tongue brushing Ethan's hand once, then again. The message was silent but clear. You are not alone. Not now. Not ever. Ethan exhaled slowly. Pain roared in his shoulder. But the warmth of Rex beside him gave him something steady to lean on. The thieves had slipped away tonight, but the night hadn't claimed everything. Not while Rex still stood, unshaken, ready to bear the weight Ethan couldn't carry alone. With effort, Ethan rose. His good hand rested on Rex's strong neck, using the shepherd's solid frame as anchor and crutch. Together they walked back, toward the cruiser. Rain pattered against the hood in a rhythm that sounded strangely like applause. Mocking or encouraging, Ethan couldn't tell. Inside the car, Rex shook droplets across the worn upholstery and curled into his seat. Still, alert, eyes bright, Ethan slid behind the wheel, exhaustion carving deep lines into his face. The chase was over, the mission unfinished. But the bond between them felt even sharper in the silence that followed. The highway stretched dark and empty behind them. Redwood, springs a faint glow on the horizon. Tomorrow would bring ridicule, no doubt. But tonight, as Rex rested his head on Ethan's lap and sighed, Ethan allowed himself the smallest comfort. He had one ally in this world who would never laugh, never doubt, and never betray. That was enough. By noon the next day, the town had shaken off the storm. The streets glistened under bright mountain sun, puddles turning into curling mist that drifted toward the ridges. The police station, a sturdy two-story brick building, on the edge of town, hummed with the usual lunch-hour rhythm. Conversation bounced across the mess hall. The clatter of trays, the buzz of vending machines, the shuffle of boots against the tile. Sergeant Ethan Parker entered quietly, boots leaving faint prints on the freshly mopped floor. His uniform was stiff, freshly laundered, but stretched tight, where a bandage pressed beneath his left shoulder seam. The ache was constant now, dulled but throbbing in rhythm with his pulse. The pain didn't matter as much as the weight pressing on his pride. The knowledge that failure had followed him here, heavy as a shadow he couldn't shake. At his side, Rex strode with calm precision. 9 years old, his muzzle silvered, his left ear bent from an old wound, the German shepherd still carried himself with the posture of a soldier. A scar down his hind leg told stories of old battles, but none of it slowed him. His eyes swept the room with sharp discipline, never missing, never resting. Ethan and Rex made their way to the far end of the hall, settling at a table washed in a slant of sunlight through tall windows. Ethan lowered his tray carefully, grimacing, as his shoulder pulled tight. Rex eased down beside the chair, sitting tall, eyes forward, posture alert, even in rest. Across the room, laughter sparked. Officer Trent Halley, barely 26, slick blonde hair, aviators perched cockily on his head indoors, snickered as soon as he saw them. He elbowed his buddy, Joel Marks, a broad-shouldered patrolman with a buzz cut and a smirk that looked permanent. "Hey, look who finally caught lunch," Trent called, voice dripping with mockery. Joel chuckled, his words thick with cruelty. "Better? Hope the food doesn't run off like those suspects last night." Laughter rippled through the tables, bouncing off tile and glass. Ethan kept his head down, eating in silence. He'd heard it all before. To them, he was the officer who almost caught the bad guy, who almost closed the case. And in this line of work, almost didn't earn respect. It earned ghosts. Rex didn't growl, didn't move, but his ears flicked sharply, his body tense under his coat like a drawn bow. His gaze snapped toward the door a second before it opened. Lieutenant Carl Briggs strode in. Mid-40s, heavy through the middle, his thinning blonde-gray hair swept, back in a style that tried and failed to look professional. His uniform was perfectly pressed, but the man himself always seemed like a cover-up. Polished on the outside, sloppy underneath. He carried a tray with a sandwich and soda, moving with the casual arrogance of someone who never worried about being challenged. "Parker," Briggs greeted, his voice syrupy with false warmth. "Heard you had a little tangle last night." "Another, one that got away." Ethan didn't look at him. He lifted his water, took a slow sip, and kept his eyes forward. "They'll be back," Carl chuckled, stopping by Ethan's table. "You sure about that? Because word is they're in circles around you, out there." The nearby table chuckled again, louder this time. One officer muttered something that made the others choke on their laughter. Trent smirked wide. "Should have let the dog drive." Ethan glanced down at Rex, who remained still. But something in the dog's posture had changed. The angle of his head, the way his gaze sharpened not on the crowd, but on Carl. Carl stepped closer, to Ethan's tray, wiping his mouth with a paper napkin. "Maybe it's not just the purse getting away. Maybe it's time we talked about retiring some of these outdated assets." That was the moment Rex rose. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was calm, controlled, a shift in weight, a planting of pause, the steady, quiet climb of a veteran stepping forward, not in fear, but in judgment. His body positioned itself between Ethan and Carl. He didn't bare his teeth, not yet. But a low, rumbling growl began in his throat, quiet, continuous, like a warning drum in the deep of the woods. His fur bristled along his back. His tail was still, but rigid. Carl blinked. "What's wrong with him?" Ethan didn't look up. "He's reading the room." Carl tried to laugh, but it came out choked. He took a small step back, holding his tray tighter. "Better get that mud under control. Wouldn't want someone getting bit." "He doesn't bite unless he smells something foul," Ethan said. The words hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Across the room, the laughter died. Conversations dimmed. Even Trent shifted in his chair, uncertain whether this was still a joke or the beginning of something no one wanted to explain. Carl lingered, for a beat longer, eyes on Rex. The dog didn't blink, didn't flinch. The growl didn't rise, but it didn't fall either. Finally, Carl muttered, "Watch yourself," and turned away. Rex didn't move until Kaga Carl Miwas several steps back. Only then did his body ease slightly, though his eyes remained fixed on the lieutenant's retreating form. Ethan reached down and gently placed a hand on Rex's back. Thaydog was warm and solid, his muscles like coiled springs beneath his coat. "You felt it, huh?" Ethan murmured. "You always do." Rex didn't reply, but the growl faded slowly, like an engine winding down. The tension didn't dissolve when Carl Briggs walked away. It lingered like humidity in the mess hall air, thick and uncomfortable. Conversations picked up again, but quieter now, more cautious. Officer Trent Halley and his group of younger patrolmen leaned in with mock curiosity, while some officers just glanced sideways, pretending to eat while clearly watching Ethan and Rex. Rex, now sitting again beside Ethan's chair, kept his head slightly raised, ears flicking toward every shift in the room. Carl had only stepped a few feet away before turning back. He carried his plastic tray in one hand, but his posture was still cocky, a half smirk curling one side of his mouth. The kind of expression worn by a man who had always gotten away with more than he should have. "I don't know why you still get field assignments, Parker," he said, his voice rising just enough to catch the attention of the room again. "Maybe the department's just lowering its standards these days. Or maybe they're too scared to admit when someone's past their prime." Ethan didn't flinch. He stared at his tray, pushing a fork through the now cold mashed potatoes. Rex, however, lifted his head fully, his body stiff again. His nostrils flared slightly. Carl kept going, emboldened by the silence. "And this dog," he sneered, jabbing a finger toward Rex. "Don't get me started. He's nothing but a liability. Too old, too slow. You're both leftovers. Hell, maybe he's the only one more washed up than you." Ethan exhaled slowly. "That's enough, Lieutenant." Carl took one step closer, tray in hand, his voice still mocking. "No, what's enough is wasting department resources on dead weight. Maybe the only thing that mud's good for is barking at shadows. He should have been put down years ago." The mess hall went silent. And then it happened. Rex surged up with the force of a cannonball, muscles springing into action before Ethan could. "Stop him!" His paws hit the floor hard, claws clicking, and in one fluid motion, he lunged toward Carl's outstretched arm. The tray clattered to the floor as Rex's jaws snapped shut around Carl's forearm with a terrifying precision. Hard enough to draw blood, but not to crush. Carl screamed in shock and pain, stumbling back into a table, knocking over a chair as officers leapt up from every direction. Ethan reacted instantly, grabbing Rex's harness and yanking him back with his good arm. "Rex, off. Off." Rex obeyed reluctantly. His jaws unclenched, and he backed off, tail stiff, teeth bared slightly as he returned to Ethan's side, still growling low in his chest. Carl staggered away, clutching his arm, eyes wild with disbelief. Blood was already soaking into the sleeve of his uniform. The mess hall was frozen, but it wasn't the wound that drew the room's attention. Next, something had fallen from Carl's jacket pocket during the struggle. A small folded envelope now spluttered open on the tile. A few crisp $100 bills were visible inside, along with a stack of documents, rubber-banded together. One paper had slid halfway out. From her angle near the vending machine, Officer Maya Turner saw a letterhead that didn't belong to any department. Paperwork. The name of a pawn shop in Denver stood out in bold font. No one moved at first. No one except Maya. Maya Turner was a patrol officer in her late 20s, sharp-featured with curly auburn hair pulled into a neat bun beneath her cap. She was shorter than most of her colleagues, but what she lacked in size, she made up for in composure. Known for her quiet diligence and sharp instincts, Mia had never bought into the precinct gossip about Ethan Parker. While others laughed at the rumors, she'd watched his calm resolve on calls, his quiet efficiency. She'd also watched Rex How the dog never barked without cause. Today, she hadn't come to the mess hall for gossip. She'd come with questions because something about Carl Briggs had never sat right with her. And now, without hesitation, she slid her phone from her pocket and began recording, holding the camera low, discreetly capturing the scene. Carl's voice cracked through the silence. "This dog, he attacked me. He's out of control. He's dangerous." "You provoked him," Ethan said, still holding Rex's harness, his voice firm. He responded to a threat. Carl's face flushed a deeper red. "A threat? I'll have your badge for this. And that animal. He's done." But the room wasn't rallying behind Carl. Not this time. Several officers had seen the way he approached Ethan. A few had even risen to intervene before Rex had. No one moved to help Carl. Ethan remained silent. His shoulder burned from the effort of pulling Rex off, but his mind was sharper now than it had been all morning. He looked at the envelope on the floor, the money, the documents, and Carl's trembling hand still clutching his wounded arm. Rex sat back down at Ethan's feet, never taking his eyes off Carl. His tongue lulled slightly, but the stiffness in his body had not eased. In the background, Maya stopped recording and tapped her screen. She didn't smile, but something in her eyes said it all. Confirmation, proof, and a shift in the tide. The afternoon sun filtered through the narrow blinds of the Internal Affairs conference room, striping the floor with harsh lines of light and shadow. The mood in the precinct had shifted. Whispers passed like wind through the halls, some sharp with judgment, others murmured with curiosity. But one thing was clear. The incident in the mess hall could no longer be ignored. Sergeant Ethan Parker sat in a straight-backed chair across from a long table, his injured shoulder still bound beneath his uniform. His storm-gray eyes were steady, his jaw set, and his expression unreadable. He had faced tougher interrogations in his early years, but this one struck deeper. It wasn't just about protocol or policy, it was about trust, and whether the badge on his chest still meant something. Across from him sat Captain Helen Drayton, a woman in her early 50s with sharp cheekbones and salt and pepper hair tied into a non-nonsense twist. She wore no makeup, no perfume. Just a charcoal gay blazer over her department-issued uniform shirt. Her reputation was ironclad, fair, thorough, and utterly unshakable. She had a calm surgical presence, and when she spoke, people listened. Standing near the back of the room, arms crossed, was Lieutenant Carl Briggs. A fresh bandage wrapped around. His forearm and the faint red mark of a bite still peeked through. His slicked back, graying blonde hair looked slightly less neat today, and the confident swagger he once carried now simmered into barely concealed anger. His story, repeated to several officers, was that the dog had attacked unprovoked, and Ethan had lost control. Ethan had said little during the preliminary questioning. He'd stuck to the facts, kept emotion out of it, and waited. He knew time was his ally because truth had a way of surfacing when people were watching. Captain Drayton tapped her pen against a folder. Sergeant Parker, Lieutenant Briggs claims the K-9 unit under your command behaved with aggression that endangered officers. Do you maintain that Rex's actions were a direct response to provocation? Yes, ma'am, Ethan said without hesitation. Rex responded to a perceived threat. He does not act on impulse. He reacts to stimulus, verbal, physical, or behavioral. I've never seen him behave outside protocol in the years we've worked together. Yet he bit a superior officer. Ethan didn't blink because that superior officer was actively threatening verbally and physically in a room full of witnesses. Before Helen could speak again, the door opened with a gentle knock. Officer Maya Turner stepped inside, holding her phone in one hand and a printed transcript in the other. Her presence in the room was unexpected, but her eyes were clear and steady. She walked with quiet, confident, shoulders squared, movements purposeful. Her auburn hair was pulled into its usual bun, and her uniform, though simple, was immaculately pressed. "Captain," she said respectfully, offering the papers, "I have something you'll want to see." Helen motioned her forward. Maya placed the transcript on the table then, without a word, set the phone down and played the video. The room filled with the echo of Carl's voice from the mess hall, sharp, sneering, unmistakable. The video showed him stepping toward Ethan, berating him, dismissing Rex as useless, calling for the dog to be put down. The atmosphere in this video was thick with rising tension. And then, at the breaking point, Rex stood, growled, and leapt. The whole sequence played out exactly as Ethan had described, measured, reactive, and in defense. When the video ended, silence followed. Even Morrow didn't. Captain Drayton raised an eyebrow, turning toward him. "Lieutenant Briggs, you failed to disclose the nature of your own conduct prior to the incident." Carl's jaw tightened. "I was speaking, bluntly, not threatening. That dog should never have been in the room." "Spoken words can be threatening, Lieutenant," Helen replied coolly, "especially when directed toward an officer already under public scrutiny, and especially when that officer's partner is trained to detect hostility." Carl said nothing more. His eyes darted briefly toward Maya, whose quiet presence now carried weight far beyond her rank. Later that afternoon, Ethan returned to the locker area to collect his belongings, Rex at his side. The precinct had shifted, again. Whispers still traveled, but now there were nods, subtle looks of respect, the kind that acknowledged a man who stood tall when it mattered. While Ethan opened his locker, Rex began to sniff around the room. The K-9's tail stiffened as he moved toward the far end of the row, stopping at Carl Briggs's locker. He sniffed once, then let out a short, low bark. Ethan paused, watching. Rex scratched once at the base of the locker, then sat down. Ethan frowned. "What is it, boy?" He crouched and opened the lower compartment. Inside, behind a row of cleaning supplies and unused paperwork, was a pair of leather gloves, black, grease-stained, one balled inside the other. Ethan pulled them out carefully. A sharp, Bitter smell rose from the fabric. It was oil and something else, something industrial. Ethan knew that scent. It was the same one from the stolen vehicle case a few nights earlier, the one he'd chased into the woods. Brake fluid, engine grease, and something grittier. Metal shavings. Rex sniffed again, nose pressing into the creases of the glove. He growled, not aggressively but with recognition. Ethan's pulse quickened. This wasn't just some misplaced gear. This was a lead. He carefully bagged the gloves, sealing them in an evidence pouch from his locker. As he turned to leave, Maya appeared, at the doorway. "I saw him drop something in there last week," she said softly. "Didn't think anything of it until now." Ethan looked at her. "You believe me?" She smiled faintly. "I did before I had the video. Now I have proof." Rex walked between them, his tail finally wagging once. It was small, but it was enough. The late afternoon sky dimmed into a wash of gray as Ethan Parker pulled the collar of his jacket tighter against the breeze. The town of Pinarove had always been quiet on the surface, but now shadows moved beneath. That stillness shadows Ethan could no longer ignore. Beside him, Rex paced in measured steps, his scarred paw leaving faint prints on the damp pavement outside the precinct. The old German shepherd, with silver streaks down his sable coat and one ear bent slightly forward, looked calm to most eyes. But Ethan knew better. Rex was locked in on something. Ever since he'd sniffed that oil-stained glove from Carl's locker, something had awakened in the dog's instincts. Ethan glanced at Maya Turner, the young female officer who now walked beside them. She was in her mid-20s, white with cropped blonde hair under her duty cap, and clear blue eyes that didn't miss a thing. Her steps were quick, decisive. "You sure you want to do this quietly?" she asked, her voice low. Ethan nodded. "No backup." "Not yet. If we're wrong, we tip Carl off. But if we're right, we'll find that stolen vehicle ring tonight," Maya said. Nothing more, only adjusted the strap of her body cam and gave Rex a soft pat. Rex sniffed the glove again as Ethan held it out, then immediately pulled forward low to the ground, tail stiff. The trio followed him through side streets, past shuttered hardware stores, and abandoned lots until they reached the edge of town. Beyond a rusting chain-link fence stood a large corrugated steel warehouse, once used for agricultural storage, now forgotten. The gate had no lock, just a sagging metal latch. Ethan's pulse quickened. Rex didn't bark. He crept forward, nose to the ground, then suddenly stopped and looked up at Ethan. A low growl rumbled in his throat. The message was clear. "Danger," Ethan signaled Maya. The two officers approached with quiet steps, wrecked between them. The warehouse door groaned on its hinges as they pushed it open. Inside, dust danced in the shafts of light slanting through the broken windows, but what caught Ethan's eye wasn't the debris. It was the line of vehicles, 6 of them parked neatly inside. Different makes, different models, all without license plates. "They match the stolen vehicle reports from the past 2 months, Maya whispered. Then Rex did something unexpected. He trotted to the far corner of the warehouse where a semi-trail sat detached from its cab. He paused, ears perked, then barked sharply. Ethan rushed over and yanked the door. Inside, curled up on a pile of blankets, was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 10. Blonde hair, pale skin smudged with grime, oversized hoodie wrapped tight around his small frame. His wrists were bound with plastic zip ties. A piece of duct tape had been peeled off his mouth, now dangling on his cheek. The boy stared, wide-eyed and shaking. Ethan knelt quickly. "It's okay. I'm Officer Parker. You're safe now. We're getting you out." Maya had already called dispatch for an ambulance and backup. It was over an hour later at Pinarove General Hospital when Ethan finally sat beside the boy's bed. His name was Jaime Walters. Pale but stable, he sipped warm soup slowly, as nurses adjusted his IV. Jaime looked up at Ethan, voice. They said if I talked, they'd come back. They won't, Ethan said firmly. We've got you. They can't hurt you now. Jaime's eyes flicked to Rex, who sat beside the bed like a statue. The boy reached a hand out, and Rex, gentle as ever, leaned in to nuzzle. His fingers. I was just trying to get my ball, Jaime murmured, staring at his hands. It rolled into the empty lot behind the old grocery store. I saw trucks driving in. They had no plates. There were men pulling off the car logos. I didn't think anyone saw me, so I ran and hid behind a dumpster, but one of them grabbed me. Ethan leaned forward. Did you see their faces? One had a tattoo, on his neck, a skull with red eyes. Maya jotted down the detail. Her jaw tight. Matches a description from a suspect 3 towns over. Same crew. Jaime blinked slowly. They said I was nosy, so they locked me in that truck. Said someone would pick it up later and drive it away. Ethan's chest tightened. If they'd been even a few hours later, Jaime's mother, tears streaming down her face, arrived not long after. She wrapped her arms around her son, sobbing into his hair. When she turned to Ethan, her voice broke. Thank you. Thank you for saving him. But Ethan shook his head and looked down at Rex. He's the one who found him. Rex, as if understanding, gave a soft bark, then lowered his head again to Jaime's lap. The boy smiled faintly and scratched behind his ear. Later that night, back at the precinct, the narrative began to shift. Word spread fast. Officers talked in, hushed tones by the vending machines. Old rumors about Ethan's past were quietly set aside, replaced by something else, respect. But not everyone was pleased. Carl sat alone at his desk, staring at a printed photo of the warehouse. His fingers drummed slowly on the edge of the table. He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket, eyes narrowing, his jaw clenched, and then, without another word, he stood and walked out into the night. The cold evening air bit into Ethan's skin as he stepped out of the precinct's rear exit, one hand gingerly touching the bandaged scrape on his temple. It had been a long day filled with interviews, paperwork, and subtle nods from officers who had once looked through him. But the victory was short-lived. Deep in his gut, he knew things were about to get worse. Rex walked beside him, alert as always. The 10-year-old German shepherd had barely rested since their return from the warehouse. His sable coat shimmered in the dim light of the parking lot lamps, silver streaks catching the glow like armor. His injured paw, scarred from a past life, moved with caution, but it didn't slow him. Ethan looked down at his companion and whispered, "You saved a kid today, buddy. Guess you're not done being a hero." They moved toward Ethan's pickup, parked beneath a flickering lamppost. A distant shout echoed from the alley between 2 buildings behind the lot, followed by the clatter of a trash can tipping. Ethan paused. Rex froze. Before he could react, movement exploded from the shadows. 3 figures rushed out, men in dark hoodies and jeans, their faces partially covered. The first one swung a metal pipe toward Ethan's midsection. Ethan grunted, stumbling back, barely blocking the strike with his forearm. The second attacker lunged, a blunt club aimed for Ethan's head, but Rex moved faster. The old shepherd sprang with a snarl that cut through the night, intercepting the blow mid-air. The club slammed against Rex's shoulder, but the dog didn't stop. He sank his teeth into the man's forearm, dragging him down with the sheer force of a freight train in fur. Ethan used the moment to tackle the first man, driving him against the side of the truck. Pain flared in his side. He'd been hit harder than he realized, but he gritted his teeth and swung a knee into the assailant's gut. The man collapsed with a wheeze. The third attacker, a wiry figure with sharp eyes and a tattoo of flames crawling up his neck, grabbed Rex by the collar and yanked back, trying to free his partner. Rex twisted, snapping toward him, but the man jabbed a knee into the dog's ribs. "Hey!" a shout rang out. From the far end of the lot, Deputy Maya Turner sprinted into view, service weapon drawn. The young officer, her blonde hair tied tightly beneath her cap, didn't hesitate. "Pine Grove PD, get on the ground." The third man cursed and fled. His partner stumbled after him, clutching his bleeding arm. The one Ethan had taken down tried to crawl, but Rex clamped his paw into the man's chest, holding him with a growl so low it seemed to rise from the earth itself. Maya rushed to Ethan's side. "You okay?" He nodded faintly, breath ragged. "Couple bruises. Nothing broken." She glanced at Rex, who still stood guard over the groaning attacker. Her eyes softened. "He's more than a dog. He's a damn shield." Ethan looked at his partner, a strange lump forming in his throat. "Yeah, he is." By the time backup arrived, the attacker had been handcuffed and loaded into a cruiser. The other two had escaped into the industrial quarter, but blood trails and security footage gave them little room to run. Inside the precinct's medical wing, Ethan sat shirtless on a metal table, while a medic cleaned the bruises forming along his ribs. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and steel. Maya leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I've been thinking," she said quietly. "This wasn't random. Someone sent them." Ethan's jaw tightened. Carl Maya stepped in closer. "We can't prove it yet, but the guy Rex caught, his name's Wes Barrow. Prior record for burglary, one-time enforcer for the Remley gang, disappeared from the radar 2 years ago. Guess who got transferred into our department around that same time?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Maya continued, "Barrow wouldn't hit a cop unprovoked. Someone promised him something." As if on cue, the door creaked open. A new figure stepped in. Captain Olivia Traz, a tall mixed-race woman in her early 50s. She wore her uniform crisp and her hair in a tight bun. Years of service etched quiet weariness into her features, but her eyes were razor-sharp. "I heard what happened," she said, her voice calm but heavy with meaning. "Barrow singing a little, not enough to name Carl, but enough to know this isn't isolated." Ethan slid off the table, wincing slightly. "What now?" Trask looked between him and Maya. "Now we move smart. We don't confront Carl. Not yet. We gather, we observe, we expose." Rex, resting at Ethan's feet, thumped his tail once against the floor. Later that night, as Ethan pulled into his driveway, he let the silence settle around him. His ribs throbbed, his thoughts raced. But when he stepped out of the truck and opened the door for Rex, something shifted. The dog paused, looked up at him, then leaned forward and gently pressed his muzzle into Ethan's leg. "You know," Ethan whispered, kneeling slowly, "I used to think I didn't deserve a second chance." He rested his hand on Rex's head, feeling the warmth beneath the aging fur. "But maybe you were mine." From across the street, the curtains twitched. Inside a dark sedan parked 3 houses down, a man with a buzz cut and worn leather gloves scribbled something into a notebook. He watched Ethan and Rex disappear into the house, then raised a phone to his ear. "It didn't work," he said into the receiver, "but he's starting to trust the girl. We'll try again soon." The first light of morning spilled through the blinds of Ethan's modest office at the precinct. He sat stiffly in the old leather chair, bandages still fresh on his arm from the ambush. Rex lay at his feet, head resting over his paws, but his ears twitched at every hallway noise. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and brewing coffee, but underneath it all, there was something heavier and urgency that had not lifted since the warehouse discovery. Across from Ethan sat Maya Turner, her auburn ponytail slightly damp from the morning drizzle, green eyes sharp with purpose. She wore a dark gray tactical hoodie over her duty shirt, casual but ready. Beside her sat Gabe, the rescued boy, now in clean clothes and clutching a sketch pad. His blonde hair was combed neatly, but a nervous energy buzzed through him. "He wants to show you something," Mia said softly, giving the boy a gentle nudge. Gabe hesitated, then opened his sketch pad. He flipped past pages of trees, cars, and shadows until he landed on a drawing. A side profile of a man near a truck talking into a phone. Though rendered in pencil, the face was unmistakable. Carl Bishop. Ethan leaned in. "You saw him there?" Gabe nodded. He was yelling. Something about wrong timing. Then the big man with the tattoos looked scared of him. Ethan exhaled slowly. The puzzle pieces clicked harder into place. Carl hadn't just planted the stolen glove. He was orchestrating this from the shadows. But hearsay and sketches wouldn't be enough. They needed proof, something that would speak louder than accusations. That was when Rex stood up. Without a sound, the old German shepherd trotted to the window, sniffed the air, then turned toward the hallway. He let out a soft, insistent whine. Ethan exchanged a glance with Maya. "Let's follow him." They moved quickly, Gabe trailing with curiosity. Rex led them past the precinct's back lot toward the old vehicle maintenance shed that had been decommissioned. For months. Rain tapped on the tin roof as Rex circled the area, nose low, tail stiff. Then he stopped at the far corner near a stack of discarded tires and broken crates. He began digging forcefully, paws flinging dirt and gravel until the sound of metal rang out. Ethan dropped to his knees. Buried beneath barely 2 inches of soil was a rusted lockbox. With a swift jerk of his multi-tool, Ethan cracked the old clasp. Inside was a weatherproof folder thick with documents. Maya grabbed her gloves and helped sift through the contents. Transaction receipts, vehicle serial numbers, burner phone logs, all signed, all dated within the past 8 months. Some documents even included internal precinct reports that only someone on the inside could access. Maya's breath caught. This is enough for a federal warrant. They returned to the precinct in silence, Ethan gripping the lockbox as though it were made of gold. Gabe, now visibly calmer, sat in the back beside Rex, who occasionally nudged the boy with his muzzle. Inside, they met with Lieutenant Sanders, a wiry man in his 50s with a thick mustache and sharp eyes that had seen too many betrayals in uniform. Sanders listened without interrupting, his jaw clenched tighter with each page of evidence. "I'll contact Internal Affairs, but if what you say is true..." He looked at Ethan, then at the dog. "Then that mutt just cracked open the case we've been stumbling in for over a year." Ethan didn't correct the word. He simply nodded and reached down to pat Rex's head. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat on the precinct steps, a thermos of lukewarm coffee in his hand. Rain had turned to mist, and the streets glistened under the soft glow of street lamps. Gabe played with a small rubber ball near the bench, occasionally tossing it for Rex, who indulged him with patient retrievals. Maya joined Ethan, hands deep in her jacket pockets. "You know," she said, "when I first transferred here, I was told you were difficult, withdrawn, angry." Ethan chuckled under his breath. Not entirely wrong. "But they didn't mention how fiercely loyal you are," she added, "or how much your dog would scare the truth out of a grown man." Ethan smiled, eyes distant. "Rex has always had a way of sniffing out what's buried." Just then, Gabe ran up, holding something tightly in his hand. "I drew this for Rex," he said, handing over a new sketch. It was a portrait Rex, sitting tall, head high, eyes bright. Around his neck was a tag labeled Shield. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. That night, the precinct filed an internal freeze on Carl's records. A sting operation was now being drafted. Ethan knew the battle wasn't over, but for the first time in months, it felt like the fog was beginning to lift. And through it all, Rex remained at his side, not just as a K-9, not just as a partner, but as the quiet guardian who never once looked away. The precinct cafeteria, once dim and echoing with the hum of microwaves and distant chatter, now stood, unusually silent. The long rows of tables had been cleared to the side. In the center of the room, A small wooden podium stood, polished and hastily adorned with the town's seal. Behind it, a banner stretched across the wall reading, "Service, Loyalty, Justice." The morning sunlight slanted through the narrow windows, catching on the dusty glass and the deep navy of Ethan's uniform. Ethan stood straight, despite the bandage, wrapped tightly around his shoulder. His dark blue shirt was neatly pressed, badge glinting near his chest. He had trimmed his scruff, and his storm-gay eyes, once dimmed by grief and self-doubt, now held quiet clarity. At his side, Rex sat alert, tail resting over his hind legs, his sable coat brushed until it gleamed under the soft overhead lights. The scar on his leg was still visible, but his posture was proud. Around his neck hung a thin blue ribbon, and from it a silver medallion engraved with the words, "K9 Hero." The room was full. Officers, detectives, clerks, even the janitor, Mr. Lyle, an elderly man with a slight hunch and kind eyes, had gathered. Ethan recognized many of the faces. Some had once whispered behind his back. Some had laughed the day he came in with wrecks and bruises. Now they stood shoulder to shoulder, their silence heavy with respect. From the far end of the room, Captain Rhee stepped forward. A tall man with broad shoulders and a lined face weathered by years in the field, Rhee was known for his discipline and few words. His salt-and-pepper hair was neatly combed, and his eyes, usually sharp and unreadable, had softened. He cleared his throat. 2 months ago, Officer Ethan Cole returned to active duty. Many doubted him. Some doubted his judgment, his instincts, and his choice of partner. Rhee looked down at Rex, then smiled faintly. Turns out instincts, especially canine ones, are harder to fool than we give credit for. A quiet ripple of laughter passed through the room, gentle and warm, Rhee continued. Thanks to the efforts of Officer Colin K9 Rex, an internal threat was exposed. Carl Bishop, once one of our own, was arrested this morning at 0632 for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and aiding criminal transport networks. He paused. Evidence uncovered by Rex himself led directly to the indictment. There was a hush, then someone clapped, then another, and another. Within seconds, the room erupted into applause. Loud, wholehearted. Ethan stood still at first, unsure if it was truly for him. But then he saw a Deputy Margot, usually stern and aloof, clapping with tears in her eyes. Officer Clint, who'd once laughed at Rex's limp, giving a respectful nod. Even Nate Simmons, the precinct's notorious cynic, grinned and muttered, "Damn dog's got more spine than most of us." Rhee raised a hand for quiet. "Before we end, there's one more matter." He turned and gestured to Maya. Maya Turner stepped forward, in full uniform. Her posture was confident, ponytailed tight, her face composed, butyl light with something deeper resolve. She glanced once at Ethan, then at the room. "I've put in a formal request," she said, voice steady. "I'm transferring from juvenile liaison to K9 support. If the offer still stands, I'd like to join Officer Cole and Rex's team." There was another wave of applause, this time mingled with cheers. Ethan looked at her, the corner of his mouth twitching, into the beginnings of a smile. "Offers always open," he said, voice low but clear. After the ceremony, people lingered, clapping Rex's side, offering Ethan their hands, their thanks. Gabe, the boy who had helped expose Carl with his drawing, stood, near the back, holding a small American flag. Someone had let him in for the event. He looked up as Ethan approached, eyes wide and proud. "You and Rex," Gabe said, "like superheroes." Ethan knelt, careful of his shoulder. "Nah, we just got lucky and we never gave up." Rex licked the boy's hand, his, tail giving a single thump. As the crowd began to disperse, Ethan made his way to the rear exit, Rex at his side. The corridor was quieter, lined with old bulletin boards and scuffed floor tiles. It led to the squad room, the place where this all began. Hess stepped inside. The same room where he'd once walked in to laughter and skepticism now felt transformed. His desk, once isolated, now had 2 new chairs beside it. One bore a sticky note reserved for Maya. The other had a dog bowl sat on the floor, freshly filled with water. Ethan sat down, exhaling deeply. Rex circled once, then lay beside him, resting his head over Ethan's boots. There were still wounds to heal. The investigation would stretch on. Carl's trial wouldn't be quick, but for now they had peace. And peace, in a world that too often broke what was loyal and kind, was the rarest metal of all. Ethan reached down, fingers brushing against Rex's fur. "You brought me back," he murmured. Rex didn't move, but his eyes opened, amber and watchful. And in them, Ethan saw the same thing he'd seen the day they walked into the precinct. Battered and alone. Trust. Sometimes miracles do not come wrapped in thunder or lightning. Sometimes they wear a badge or walk on 4 tired legs with scars and quiet courage. Ethan had lost his place. Rex had been discarded. But together they found what the world said they couldn't have again: honor, purpose, and home. The story is not just about a police officer and his dog. It's about grace in our darkest hour. It reminds us that even when we are bruised, broken, or forgotten, God sees us. And sometimes He sends help in the form of loyalty, second chances, and a bark in the silence. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in redemption. Hit subscribe if you believe every soul, human or animal, deserves a second chance. Leave a comment below and tell us what moment moved you most. And if you still believe that God works in mysterious ways, type Amen in the comments. May the Lord bless every person watching this video. May He send you the miracle you didn't know you were waiting.